Hi, I am Jessica Mickelbust, the Regional Transportation Director for CDOT's Region 1, which covers the Denver metro area from the Plains to the I-70 Eisenhower Johnson Memorial Tunnel. Colorado's I-70 mountain corridor is unlike any other interstate in the country, winding through the spectacular Rockies, providing a critical transportation connection to communities, motorists, tourists, and commerce. Building, maintaining, and improving a sustainable connection requires a collaborative process with communities and a diverse range of stakeholders. In this video, CDOT features leaders in this collaboration. They will discuss the Programmatic Environmental Impact Statement, PEIS, that serves as the beacon for decision-making in the I-70 mountain corridor.
Obviously, aside from the geography and the mountainous terrain and the weather, it's also politically very unusual in that it's a highway that links a metro area at one end. It's got resort-focused counties at the other end, and in the middle it's got a non-resort focused county, kind of a working man's county, and all of those different constraints are pulling the highway in different directions.
So one of the things I always think of, it was a big cloud of mistrust that was growing and building, and I think a lot of it was due to Federal Highways and CDOT in the past making decisions in the corridor, moving forward with projects without getting enough input from the local stakeholders. You know, we followed the NEPA process, which requires a stakeholder engagement. We did that normal stuff. But I think we quickly realized that it wasn't a normal world out here in I-70. Everybody knows it's a beautiful corridor, but it also is, in addition to being an interstate, it's the backyard and the main street for these local folks. And so I don't think we understood that at first, and I think it kind of came across pretty clearly that we needed to do something more special.
In 2007, when Governor Ritter asked me to become Executive Director of CDOT, I noticed fairly early on what I had been reading in the media about the difficulties in a number of places in the state of moving ahead with the required environmental impact work. And what seemed to be quite a bit of discussion and criticism coming from local governments and citizens. And as soon as I got to CDOT and saw how much money we were investing, the delays were costing us, and I started getting calls from friends and local governments, citizens on various transportation projects to see that there was quite a lot of disaffection, disgruntlement, and problems. And so we decided at CDOT, this needs to move forward. We need to figure out what we're doing wrong and make it work.
In an effort to break through more than 20 years of gridlock and intense conflict over the future of the I-70 corridor, CDOT and the Federal Highway Administration, known as FHWA, authored the first draft of the PEIS for the I-70 corridor. This is a document that recommends solutions and identifies a vision for this stretch of highway.
Well, let's just say that that draft of the PEIS was so limited in scope that it didn't include any considerations for, the economic impacts of the counties and communities along the corridor. And that stretch of I-70 was, and still is today, inextricably linked to the economic fortunes of our communities on this corridor. And I think that was a massive red flag.
But you add the mountain terrain of the canyons here, the difficult seasonal weather changes, and then even in 2007, the huge congestion times that we were getting on the corridor for 100 miles or more. It was all pointing to a very serious problem. And I could tell in the room, we had ground to a halt in the conversations and decision making.
The Governor, CDOT, and the Federal Highway Administration convened a group of 27 diverse local governments, agencies, environmental groups, and private sector interests in what was called the collaborative effort. Finally, in 2011, After years of negotiation and learning to listen to one another, the final PEIS was signed, ushering in a 50-year vision for the I-70 mountain corridor. The PEIS identified the preferred alternative, which outlined the minimum and maximum program of improvements, a consensus agreement that must be followed. The preferred alternative introduced adaptive management and context-sensitive solutions, two techniques that aim to bring stakeholders into the design process early on.
The preferred alternative was the results of the jurisdictions looking at what was happening on the highway at the beginning of our century. It became very clear to all involved that the increasing number of vehicles was going to become untenable within our communities and at our resort areas. So the first part of the preferred alternative, the first component, was that the long-range vision for this corridor should be high-speed transit, and the investigation of that transit should be a prime goal of the alternative. The second was a recognition that while we waited, there were things that had to happen to the highway. The Vail climbing lanes and the current Floyd Hill project are two examples of that. The third component of the preferred alternative was the non-infrastructure improvements, and there are all kinds of little improvements that go on to the highway, whether they're pull-offs for safety. The idea of context-sensitive solutions actually came from the FHWA a number of years ago, when they indicated that it would be extremely helpful if the parties that were directly involved in or directly impacted by a particular project would be brought together early in the design. As a matter of fact, very early before the design, when the project was first conceived, to participate in the design of the project to assure that all of those various interests, whether they were business interests of a community, whether they were recreational interests, whether they were natural environment interests, were considered. What the record of decision essentially says is that the adaptive management will mean that following a project, the success of the project will be examined, and then the decisions will be made as to what the next steps should be, in keeping with the ability of the communities to sustain whatever the project is going to be. So that is the heart of what an adaptive management program is, as laid out in our record of decision.
The I-70 collaborative effort is a group of roughly 30, 32, 33 stakeholders in the corridor, stretching from the Denver metro area to the West Slope, Eagle County and beyond. It includes representatives from the business community, from government, from agencies, and various interests in the corridor. The group meets twice a year, the last Wednesday of April and the last Wednesday of September. It operates by consensus. There's no formal voting of any kind. If one member of the CE disagrees with the direction that's taken, then that direction is not taken. It plays a very important role in a few ways. One is it provides a forum to track the programmatic progress of the ROD, the record of decision that was issued. It provides a forum for making sure that improvements to the corridor are made consistent with the ROD and further the ROD. It also, frankly, was kind of the instigator and the reason why the context-sensitive solution, the CSS process, was formed.
The collaborative effort wasn't the only stakeholder group to emerge from the completion of the PEIS. In 2004, several municipal and county jurisdictions came together and adopted an intergovernmental agreement, or IGA, to form the I-70 Coalition to give local governments and businesses a larger voice in the I-70 PEIS process.
So I'll highlight 3 ways the organization is different. The first is around mission and scope of work. While the collaborative efforts mission is entirely focused around the I-70 record of decision, the coalition's mission is much broader. And an example of that broader effort has to do with the coalition's engagement in transportation demand management, or TDM as it's called. So the non-infrastructure improvements outlined in the record of decision are examples of TDM measures. And the collaborative effort supports and endorses those efforts, but they don't get engaged in the actual implementation of TDM programs. That work is really left to the I-70 Coalition and other organizations. And so TDM is just a significant part of the coalition's scope of work. The membership of the two organizations is also different. The coalition's membership is determined through its bylaws, and it's limited to local governments and private businesses. The collaborative effort membership, on the other hand, is much broader, and that includes nonprofit organizations, state agencies, and federal agencies. And then the third and a really important difference between the two is around advocacy. The coalition engages pretty extensively with the state legislature and Colorado's congressional delegation around issues and policies that impact the I-70 mountain corridor. The CE, on the other hand, does not engage in any kind of state or federal advocacy, and that is because many of the CE members are just precluded from doing so.
The most important part of it is that it mandates that we use the CSS process, and the collaborative effort is kind of the tool that makes sure that the CSS process goes. And the CSS process requires everybody to come to the table, and the only thing it guarantees is that everyone is going to be disappointed. Nobody gets their way, but everybody gets a voice. And when you have the various viewpoints coming together through that CSS process, the solution is not perfect for any one of those viewpoints, but in my view, it's perfect for the whole corridor, because all voices are guaranteed to be heard, and nobody gets to veto it, and nobody gets to railroad their view. It's a balance. That PIS record of decision is our North Star, and it's what drives where I-70 is going to be, now 35 years from now.
The collaborative effort has been in existence since 2007. Well, with the turnover in the agencies, with the turnover in the stakeholders, over the course of time, that's naturally going to happen. There's going to be a loss of institutional memory, a loss of knowledge of the history of the CE and the history of this corridor, and that is history that should not be lost. It's very important that every member of the collaborative effort take the time to research, to read the background on this, to understand the history of this, because this is really an unprecedented effort that was taking place. So understanding kind of the core tenets of the CE, the history of the CE, and the role it plays is critically important, because this problem of I-70 is not going away.
Intervening years, I think that it has helped design projects that are far more publicly acceptable.
It doesn't matter how big the room is. You have to have everybody here, and they have to have equal standing with everybody else. And we all need to listen to each other.
The way CDOT has approached large projects has substantially shifted over the past several decades, and even more so in the past few years. Today, we pay much greater attention to what matters most. We consider the way our projects can affect our neighbors and the communities that surround our busiest roads, as well as the environmental impact to Colorado's beautiful spaces. Through extensive stakeholder and community collaboration and early discussions on project needs, we are able to strategically identify, develop, and ultimately build transportation improvements for Colorado. Thank you for your participation in the I-70 collaborative effort. We hope that this video has given you an appreciation for the changes to the I-70 corridor over the decades and the changes that are still ahead.